Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Untold Survivor Stories, where the rain falls gently and survival tales help you drift off to sleep. I'm here to lead you through today's story, helping you relax and drift off to sleep. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to hear where you're joining us from and what time it is in your area. Feel free to share in the comments. Daniel had never been one to seek adventure. He'd always been a creature of comfort, a man who preferred the hum of his office, the monotony of routine, and the dull buzz of city life. Adventure? No, that wasn't for him. He was perfectly content with the way things were, with his 9-to-5 job and evenings spent watching television or reading. That was until the invitation came. A remote cabin, an escape from everything. No signals, no distractions, just silence. He wasn't prepared for what lay ahead. The weather report had promised sunshine for the next few days, but as Daniel drove farther into the mountains, the clouds seemed to gather in the distance like a dark omen. It didn't matter. He wanted isolation. His job had drained him, the constant emails and meetings, the pressure to perform. He needed a break, a chance to reset. A small remote cabin on the outskirts of a forested area seemed like the perfect place to do that. The road up to the cabin was barely a path, more a suggestion of a route than an actual road. His car bumped over rocks and twisted around sharp turns, but Daniel wasn't bothered. His thoughts wandered, imagining the solitude he would enjoy. The cabin was perched on a small hill, surrounded by towering trees that blocked the majority of sunlight. As Daniel stepped out of the car, he noticed the smell of damp wood and moss in the air, a scent that should have been calming but instead made him uneasy. The cabin itself looked old, worn down by years of exposure to the elements. Its weathered wood creaked as he opened the door, the hinges groaning in protest. Perfect, he muttered under his breath. The rustic charm was exactly what he was looking for, even if it did feel a little too isolated. He entered and set down his bags, taking in the musty smell of the place. The interior was sparse, with only a few mismatched pieces of furniture. A couch, a table, a couple of chairs. The cabin's old charm was undeniable, but it felt eerie, as if it had been abandoned long ago. Still, the silence, the kind of quiet that pressed on the eardrums, was exactly what Daniel had wanted. The perfect escape. The first night passed slowly, as the darkness outside seemed to stretch on endlessly. The wind howled against the walls, and the trees seemed to lean in closer, whispering secrets to each other. But Daniel paid no mind to it. He lit a fire in the stone hearth, poured himself a drink, and sat in the cozy armchair, relaxing for the first time in months. Still, there was something about the silence that gnawed at him. It wasn't the usual kind of peace. It was too thick, too still. It wasn't natural. The sounds of the forest were absent, as if nature itself had decided to hold its breath. Even the occasional gust of wind seemed muted. He shook off the unease, attributing it to the unfamiliar surroundings. The fire crackled and snapped, its warmth filling the room, and he began to doze in the chair, the shadows of the cabin dancing on the walls. The second day started with an uncomfortable chill. Daniel had intended to go out for a hike, but the weather had shifted. The sky was now overcast, dark clouds hanging low, casting an oppressive shadow over the land. He pulled on his jacket and stepped outside, hoping for a change in the atmosphere. But the chill sank into his bones as soon as he stepped onto the porch. The woods surrounding the cabin were eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling of leaves in the breeze. He walked further into the trees, the ground beneath his boots soft with fallen leaves and wet soil. The stillness of the forest was unsettling. It was as if the world around him had paused, waiting for something. The trees seemed to loom over him, their twisted branches like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. Daniel tried to shake off the feeling. It wasn't like him to be so jumpy. He was just in a new environment, that's all. But there was something about the place, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He walked deeper into the woods, eventually stumbling across something strange. A small clearing nestled among the trees. In the center was a circle of large stones, moss-covered and ancient-looking. The stone circle was at odds with everything around it, too deliberate, too intentional for such an overgrown forest. Something about it felt off. Curiosity got the better of him. He stepped into the circle, brushing his fingers against the rough surface of one of the stones. It was cold, and as his hand touched it, a strange vibration hummed through his fingertips, a low, almost imperceptible buzz that seemed to travel up his arm and settle in his chest. Then, in the center of the stone circle, something caught his eye. A small metallic object partially buried in the moss. It was smooth and rounded, almost like a small talisman or an ancient relic. Hesitantly, Daniel knelt down and picked it up. The moment his fingers wrapped around it, the ground beneath him trembled. The sky darkened, and the air grew thick with an unnatural humidity. A low hum vibrated in the air, making Daniel's skin crawl. He felt a coldness spread through his body, a sense of dread crawling up his spine. Before he could fully process what was happening, the trees around him seemed to shift, the paths he had walked down vanishing before his eyes. The clearing he had stumbled upon was no longer where it had been. The trees that once bordered it had now closed in, creating an impenetrable wall of foliage. Panic set in. He spun around, trying to find his way back, but everything looked different. The forest no longer made sense. It was as if the woods themselves had rearranged, trapping him in some kind of labyrinth. The path that had led him to the clearing was gone. Instead, there were only thick shadows and twisted trunks, all of them looking the same. His heart pounded in his chest. The object in his hand was still cold, and it hummed in an eerie rhythm that made his skin prickle. He turned, trying to retrace his steps, but everything was wrong. The whispers began. At first, they were faint. A soft murmur carried on the wind. Then they grew louder, clearer. It wasn't wind. It was voices. Low, guttural, and unintelligible. They seemed to come from the trees themselves, from the very earth beneath his feet. The words were harsh, but there was something rhythmic about them, almost like a chant. Daniel's pulse quickened. He was no longer alone. Suddenly the air shifted. It felt colder, like the forest was breathing, as if the land itself was alive. A shadow flickered between the trees. A figure, tall and vaguely human, but its form twisted and unnatural. Its eyes were glowing faintly, two yellow orbs in the darkness. It watched him, its gaze unblinking and predatory. Daniel tried to run, but his legs felt heavy. The whispers rose to a crescendo, and the forest seemed to press in from all sides. The trees twisted, their branches creaking, as though the very land had come alive to trap him. His breath caught in his throat as he realized he was being hunted. He stumbled through the woods, disoriented, each step taking him deeper into the maze of trees. The air seemed to thicken around him, making it harder to breathe. His legs burned from exhaustion, but he couldn't stop. The figure, the creature, was still out there, somewhere. He could feel its eyes on him, its presence like a cold hand on the back of his neck. Night fell quickly, the sky turning black above him. The whispers became a constant hum, a low, vibrating noise that scraped against his sanity. He was alone, but not truly. The creature was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. He found shelter in a hollowed-out tree, huddling inside as the rain began to fall. The drops hammered against the bark, filling the air with their rhythm. It was an eerie comfort, the sound almost drowning out the whispers. But the creature wasn't done with him. It came closer. Daniel could feel it, the weight of its gaze pressing on him from the darkness. He clutched the object in his hand, feeling its cold surface pulse with a strange energy. The whispers turned into guttural growls, rising in volume as the creature moved closer. He didn't know how much longer he could survive. His mind was unraveling, the fear and exhaustion taking their toll. The woods were alive, and it wasn't just the trees that hunted him. It was something older, something more primal. The next day, Daniel stumbled across the stone circle again. He didn't know how he had found it, but there it was. Its moss-covered stones, the air buzzing with that same strange hum. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. The object in his hand seemed to pull him toward the circle. He didn't question it. Desperation clouded his judgment. He needed to end this, needed to escape. He placed the object back into the center of the stone circle, and the moment he did, the ground trembled once more. The creature appeared, standing at the edge of the clearing. Its eyes glowed with that sickly yellow light, and it let out a low growl. But this time, Daniel didn't run. He stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. The ground cracked open beneath him, and a black fog poured from the earth, swirling around his feet. The trees screamed, their trunks twisting and cracking like they were alive. And then, in a burst of cold wind, everything went silent. The morning sun broke through the mist. Daniel stood at the center of the stone circle, drenched in sweat, trembling. The creature was gone. The forest was still. He turned to leave, but as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The whispers were gone, but they had left something behind. A shadow, a presence. He had survived, but he wasn't sure if he had escaped. Sarah had never considered herself a thrill seeker. Her life was predictable, even mundane at times, working as a photographer, traveling for assignments, and spending her nights editing photos. But it was one of these assignments that led her to the cabin in the woods, a place she would never forget, though she wished she could. The rain began falling softly the moment Sarah pulled up to the abandoned cabin. It was late afternoon, and the sky was overcast with thick, dark clouds. The drive up the winding mountain roads had taken longer than expected, but there she was, staring at the small structure in front of her. The cabin was worn, its once bright wood faded to a dull gray, the roof sagging in places, and the windows boarded up. The air was thick with humidity, and the scent of pine mixed with the faint smell of something old, something forgotten. Sarah wasn't here for the charm. She was here for the photos. A new project showcasing the beauty of decay. The old, the broken, the forgotten. She had always found something hauntingly beautiful in the abandoned. Grabbing her camera gear from the back of her car, Sarah stepped out into the rain, the cold droplets soaking through her jacket almost immediately. She set up her equipment inside the cabin, making sure the damp conditions didn't interfere with her work. There was no electricity, no running water, just the raw, quiet isolation of the woods surrounding her. She snapped a few shots, adjusting the settings on her camera, taking in the silence. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was unsettling. The deeper Sarah delved into the cabin, the more she began to feel as if the place was watching her. At first, she dismissed it as nerves. After all, she was alone in a desolate place, miles from the nearest town. Her heart raced a little faster than usual, but that was to be expected. It was a new environment. But as she explored further, something about the cabin made her skin crawl. The wooden floor creaked under her weight, and every time she turned around, she swore she saw something move in the corner of her vision. Just a shadow, a flicker, but it was enough to unsettle her. Sarah paused and stared at the photograph she'd just taken. It was of the farthest corner of the room, near the boarded-up window. The flash had illuminated the corner, but there was something strange in the image. A figure, tall, slender, draped in a long black coat. Its face was obscured by shadows, but its posture was unnerving, unnaturally still, almost too still. Her fingers trembled as she zoomed in on the figure. Her heart hammered in her chest. She was sure she hadn't seen anyone when she'd taken the photo. The cabin had been empty, as far as she could tell. This was ridiculous. Her mind was playing tricks on her. Maybe the shadows from the rain outside had created an odd illusion. She shook her head and took another deep breath. She looked back up at the cabin's dark interior, forcing herself to focus. But that feeling, the one that had been creeping in since she arrived, was still there. The feeling of being watched. Trying to push the fear aside, Sarah set the camera down and headed towards the door, hoping the fresh air outside would clear her mind. She swung open the creaky door, and the heavy scent of rain and earth filled her lungs. The woods stretched out before her, dark and dense, with only the sound of the rain tapping against the leaves and the occasional crack of thunder in the distance. She stepped outside to take a few landscape shots, but when she looked back at the cabin, something made her pause. The door had swung shut on its own. It was barely hanging on its hinges, but it was closed. She hadn't heard it move. Sarah frowned, her unease growing. It wasn't unusual for doors to swing in the wind, but the way the door had shut without a sound felt wrong. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to check the time. It was nearing sunset, and she knew she needed to leave before the weather worsened. She packed up her camera gear quickly and made her way back to the car. But when she reached the dirt path, her legs suddenly felt weak. It was strange. She couldn't explain why, but she felt trapped. The trees seemed to close in around her, their long branches stretching like dark arms above her. The rain continued to fall, but it didn't feel like a natural storm anymore. It was too quiet, too still. As she reached the end of the path, she saw her car in the distance, parked next to the edge of the woods. The relief that washed over her was short-lived. The car's engine was off. Her heart skipped a beat. Sarah was certain she'd turned it off when she parked earlier. The keys were still in her bag, and her mind raced, trying to rationalize what was happening. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she had simply forgotten. She wasn't sure. But the unsettling feeling only grew stronger as she approached the car, reaching for the door handle. That was when she heard it, the faintest rustling from behind her. She turned quickly, her eyes scanning the trees, but there was nothing. Not a single movement, not a creature in sight. She took a breath, but the air felt thick, almost suffocating. Something was out there, watching. She froze, trying to suppress the panic that was creeping up her spine. It was then that she heard it again. A faint whisper, like the wind, but not quite. As if someone or something was speaking, but she couldn't make out the words. Her pulse raced. She grabbed her camera bag and quickly turned back toward the cabin. It wasn't much farther, and she had no idea what was out there. Her feet splashed through the wet earth as she retraced her steps. The rain had intensified now, coming down in sheets. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she hurried back toward the cabin, trying not to slip on the slick path. Every creak of the wood under her feet seemed to echo in her ears, and she swore she heard something following her. But when she turned around, the path was empty. She was almost back to the cabin when she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, just behind her. Sarah spun around, her eyes wide with fear. The rain poured down, the trees swaying with the wind. But there was nothing. No one. Nothing but the sound of her own heart pounding in her chest. Her mind raced. What was happening? Was she losing her grip on reality? The footsteps had been real. She was sure of it. But who or what was out there? She turned and ran, pushing her way back to the cabin's door. She reached for the handle, but it wouldn't open. The door was jammed. Panic set in as she rattled the door handle, trying to force it open. Suddenly, she heard a noise behind her. A slow creak, like a door opening. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. In the corner of the room stood a figure, tall and thin, draped in a long black coat. Its face was hidden by the shadows. It stood perfectly still, but it was no illusion. She had seen it. She had seen it before. But now it was moving. Step by slow step, it glided toward her, its eyes locked on her. She could feel its gaze, even though she couldn't see its face. Fear gripped her chest, and she turned to run, but the door was still stuck. Her heart pounded in her ears as the figure took another step forward. There was no escape. Her body was frozen, her mind screaming for her to move, to do something. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't a survivalist. She wasn't prepared for what was happening. She didn't know how to fight, how to survive. But she had to try. With a burst of adrenaline, Sarah kicked at the door, her foot slamming into the wood. The door shuddered but didn't open. The figure was closer now, its presence suffocating. With one last, desperate effort, she threw her entire weight against the door, and it finally gave way. She tumbled outside, into the cold, the rain, the dark woods. The air was heavy with dread, but there was a part of her that couldn't stop. She had to move. She had to escape. She ran, her legs burning, her breath ragged. The woods around her seemed to close in, but she didn't stop. Not until she saw it, the faint glow of headlights ahead. Her car. She barely registered how she reached it, how her hands fumbled for the keys, how the engine roared to life. But she was moving, her foot on the gas pedal, her heart still racing. She glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. For a moment she thought she had escaped it, but deep inside, she knew the woods weren't finished with her. They never were. As Sarah drove away, her grip tightened on the steering wheel. The rain, the woods, the figure, they were still with her, lurking just beyond the edge of her mind. But for now, at least, she was alive. And that, she told herself, was enough. The rain hit the windshield in heavy sheets, blurring the landscape as Alex Cole drove down the isolated road that led to Ironclad Manor. He had been called here for a reason. His reputation as a seasoned investigator of the paranormal had earned him this job. He was no stranger to haunted places, to things that went bump in the night. But even now, the eerie reputation of Ironclad Manor weighed heavily on him. The mansion was notorious. Situated on a lonely hill, far from the nearest town, It had been abandoned for decades. Over the years, countless people had tried to explore its decaying halls, only to vanish without a trace. The locals whispered about the malevolent spirit that trapped its victims within the manor's walls. A spirit so powerful, it could manipulate time and space itself. But most chilling of all was the legend that the mansion, too, was alive, shifting and changing its structure to ensnare those who dared to enter. Alex had seen enough to believe in the unexplainable, but even he wasn't sure what to expect from this place. The reports he'd read described strange occurrences, unsettling noises, sudden temperature drops, and the feeling of being watched. But no one had ever survived long enough to provide any concrete evidence. They had all been consumed by the manor, each of them trapped by its malevolent spirit. This wasn't just another ghost hunt. It felt different. This time, survival was going to be the challenge. He parked his car at the edge of the gravel path, staring up at the looming silhouette of the manor. The mansion loomed like a shadow, its silhouette obscured by the torrential downpour. A chill crawled up his spine as he stepped out of the car, his boots crunching the wet gravel beneath him. He'd brought everything he'd need: tools, cameras, a flashlight, and a notebook to document the haunting. His breath fogged in the cold night air as he approached the front door, which creaked ominously in the wind. His instincts told him to be cautious, but it was too late to back out now. He reached for the brass doorknob. The door swung open with an eerie screech, revealing the mansion's decaying interior. The air inside was thick, stale, and smelled of mildew, dust, and something else. Something far more sinister. As he stepped across the threshold, the door slammed shut behind him, making him jump. He turned, expecting to see the exterior, but only saw the dark hallway stretching ahead, the walls dripping with moisture. The only source of light was the dim glow of his flashlight, casting long shadows on the cracked floorboards. He took a deep breath. "Let's see what you got," he muttered to himself. But as he walked further into the manor, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. He moved deeper into the mansion, his footsteps echoing off the walls. The mansion was enormous, with endless corridors that seemed to twist and stretch in every direction. Each room he entered was more unsettling than the last. Cracked mirrors reflected his image back at him, distorted and unnatural. Old portraits hung crooked on the walls, their eyes following his every move. And then it happened. A sudden chill shot through the air, sharp and biting. The floor creaked beneath him, and the faint sound of whispers filled the hallway. Alex froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight. It flickered and then went out, leaving him in total darkness. The whispers grew louder, almost like a chant. His heartbeat quickened. "Is someone there?" he called into the silence, his voice shaky despite his efforts to remain calm. No answer. He pulled out a spare flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the strange symbols etched into the walls. They were words, but not in any language he recognized. They seemed to shift, twisting in and out of focus, almost as if the walls themselves were alive. Suddenly, the air seemed to grow thick with malevolent energy. The temperature dropped even further. The whispers began to coalesce, forming words, and then a voice, a low, guttural whisper, spoke directly in his ear. "Leave now. You cannot escape. You belong to me." Alex's blood ran cold. He spun around, but the hallway was empty. He stood motionless, his mind racing. The walls felt like they were closing in, the space around him tightening, warping, as if the very structure of the manor was alive, rearranging itself to trap him. The floor beneath him groaned, and suddenly, the ceiling above cracked open, dropping a small dust storm into the room. In an instant, the hallway shifted again, and Alex found himself in a completely different place. A massive ballroom, its grand chandelier dangling precariously above. The walls were lined with faded tapestries, their faces obscured by layers of dust. The windows were black with grime, blocking any view of the outside world. He was trapped. Panic clawed at him, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was no ordinary haunting. The manor was alive, and it was manipulating the very fabric of reality around him. It was playing with him, toying with his mind. He turned to the grand staircase that spiraled upward, its marble steps cracked and uneven. If the spirit wanted him trapped, he wasn't going to give it the satisfaction. He would fight, push through the fear, and uncover the truth about this place. As he ascended the stairs, he felt something brush against his back, a cold, unseen presence. The whispers returned, louder this time, no longer just words, but memories. His memories. Your father left you. Your mother died alone. Your friends abandoned you when you needed them most. The voice twisted his past, throwing his regrets and fears into sharp relief. Alex stopped. His heart pounded in his chest, and a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He turned to see an image in the foggy reflection of the ballroom mirror. His own face stared back at him, but it was distorted, twisted in agony. The reflection of himself reached out, its fingers brushing the glass. A sharp pain shot through his chest, as if a hand had gripped his heart. He gasped, falling to his knees. The manor was not just playing with his mind, it was feeding on his darkest memories, his deepest fears. He had to focus. The manor wanted him to break, to succumb to its terror. But if he could understand the history of Ironclad Manor, the key to escaping might reveal itself. Struggling to his feet, Alex searched the ballroom. His eyes fell on an old, tattered journal lying on a table near the far corner. He stumbled toward it, hoping it held some clue. He opened the pages, and as he read, a chilling truth began to emerge. Ironclad Manor had once belonged to a family steeped in occult practices. They had built the mansion as a sanctuary for their rituals, but something had gone wrong. The family had tried to trap a powerful spirit within the walls, and in doing so, they had angered it beyond measure. The spirit had become trapped with them, but it was no longer bound to a single location. It had learned to manipulate the very mansion itself. Alex's mind raced. The spirit was playing a game, drawing him deeper into its web. But the only way to break free was to confront it. Face his regrets, his fears, and the darkness that had followed him throughout his life. But the game wasn't over. As the manor shifted again, the walls closing in around him, Alex realized that the true horror of Ironclad Manor wasn't just the supernatural force within it. It was the fact that no matter what he did, no matter how hard he fought, the manor would never let him leave unless it wanted him to. A sudden realization hit him. He had to face the spirit on its terms. The manor was alive, and it thrived on fear. If he could stop being afraid, if he could turn the tables and take control, he might just escape. The next step was clear. It was time to stop running, to confront the very thing that had haunted him all his life. The fear of being trapped, of being consumed by the past. He was going to play the spirit's game, and he would win. With newfound determination, Alex began to walk through the shifting halls, the walls twisting as if trying to block his path. His heart pounded, but he ignored it. Every time a new wall closed off his escape, he turned and found a new route. The whispers faded as he began to focus only on his goal, to reach the heart of the manor and destroy the spirit's power. The deeper Alex ventured, the more the walls seemed to push back. He began to encounter strange visions, scenes from his past, moments when he had felt powerless or betrayed, his fears made manifest, his father abandoning him, his mother's painful death, friends who turned their backs on him when he needed them the most. But each time, Alex found the strength to push through. He didn't let the visions overwhelm him. He had come to realize something. Those were just shadows of the past. They couldn't hurt him anymore. Finally, in the deepest part of the mansion, Alex found the source of the spirit's power. A dark, pulsating core hidden beneath the mansion's foundation. It was here that the family had trapped the spirit, and it was here that Alex would break its hold. With a deep breath, Alex stepped forward. The walls began to tremble, the whispers returning in a deafening chorus. The dark energy surged, but Alex didn't flinch. He had no fear left to give. In one final act of defiance, Alex reached for the ancient symbol from the journal, pressing it into the pulsating core. The energy exploded outward in a blinding flash, and the mansion shook violently. For a moment, everything went dark. When Alex opened his eyes, the mansion was still. The oppressive weight that had filled the air had vanished. The whispers were gone. The walls no longer twisted. Ironclad Manor was no longer alive. He had survived. Alex stepped outside, rain fading, stars breaking through. The nightmare was over. The storm had come out of nowhere. One moment, the sky was clear. The engines of the aircraft humdrum as they cut through the vast sky. The next, a swirl of dark clouds loomed on the horizon, an angry vortex of nature's wrath that had taken the crew by surprise. By the time the turbulence hit, it was already too late. Ryan Carter, the lead passenger safety officer, grabbed the armrest, his knuckles white. He could feel the dread creeping in, the realization sinking deep into his gut. This was not a routine storm. The aircraft jolted violently, sending passengers screaming into chaos. The oxygen masks deployed with a hiss, and Ryan's training kicked in. He moved quickly down the aisles, urging passengers to stay calm, to secure their seatbelts. But his words were drowned out by the screams of panic, the storm's fury pressing against the metal skin of the plane. Through the thickening chaos, Ryan saw the pilot's cabin door burst open, the pilot's voice crackling through the intercom. "We're losing altitude fast. Prepare for impact. Brace for impact." Then, everything went black. When Ryan regained consciousness, it wasn't the familiar hum of the aircraft he heard. The world was eerily quiet. The sound of rain tapping against the jungle leaves above filled the air as he groggily sat up, his head pounding. His hand instinctively reached for his seatbelt. Nothing. It was gone. Panic gripped him for a brief moment as he realized he wasn't in his seat anymore. A sharp hiss to his left caught his attention. He turned and saw the wreckage of the plane, its metallic body twisted and half-submerged in thick underbrush. The smell of gasoline and burning rubber mingled with the rich, earthy scent of the jungle. He pushed himself up, shaking off the fog in his head. He stumbled toward the wreckage, where he found the survivors scattered across the ground. Some were unconscious, others were already scrambling to help their fellow passengers, while others sat in shock. They were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees and the distant sounds of unseen creatures. A woman, maybe in her late 30s, caught his attention. She was kneeling beside a man who had a deep gash in his leg. The blood was pooling around his foot, but he was still breathing. "Help!" she cried out, her voice trembling. Ryan didn't hesitate. He moved toward them, assessing the situation. The man needed a tourniquet. He quickly ripped a piece of his shirt, wrapping it around the man's upper thigh tightly. The bleeding slowed, but not enough to bring him comfort. The man's condition was deteriorating fast. "I need water," Ryan said, looking around. "And we need to secure this area. If anyone has a first aid kit, now would be the time." A few passengers gathered around him. Ryan, though he wasn't a doctor, knew how to manage in emergencies. He had been trained in wilderness survival and first aid, and now it seemed like that training was going to be tested to its limit. The woman, who had introduced herself as Sarah, nodded. She started digging through her bag, pulling out a small bottle of water. She passed it to Ryan. "Thank you," Ryan muttered. He poured the water into the man's mouth, but he barely stirred. His breathing was shallow, and the jungle's heat weighed on them all. The air was thick with humidity, the oppressive jungle alive with insects and the distant calls of predators. "How long until rescue?" Sarah asked, her voice thin. Ryan exhaled heavily. "There's no rescue coming. Not unless we get out of here ourselves. The storm has disabled the plane's communications, and we're nowhere near any civilization. We need to focus on surviving, find shelter, and figure out our next steps." Hours later, they had gathered in a loose circle, the remnants of their plane's fuselage standing as a haunting reminder of their situation. Ryan stood at the center, his mind working on overdrive. The sun was already setting, casting an eerie golden light over the jungle, and the air was thick with the sound of buzzing insects and distant animal calls. "All right, listen up," Ryan said, his voice steady but firm. "We need to stick together. I know everyone's scared, but we can't let panic take over. First thing we need to do is find fresh water and shelter." "What about food?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible above the sounds of the jungle. Ryan paused. He had been trained in survival skills. He knew how to find edible plants, how to trap animals, how to survive in extreme conditions. But this was different. The jungle around them was alive, pulsating with danger. Its beauty hid a sinister side. "We'll deal with food after we get a safe place to stay," Ryan replied. "Let's start by scouting around and marking the area. We don't know what's out there, but we do know it's probably not friendly." The jungle seemed to close in around them as they ventured deeper, their path narrow and winding. Ryan led the way, his machete cutting through the thick undergrowth. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves set his nerves on edge. The deep, dark green of the trees stretched far above them, blocking out much of the sky, leaving them with only the light filtering in from the west. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and the oppressive humidity became stifling. They found a small clearing near a stream, and Ryan felt a sense of relief as they set up a temporary camp. It was nowhere near safe, but it would have to do. The first sign that something was wrong came just after dawn. Ryan had been awake for hours, pacing around the perimeter of their camp, keeping watch. There were sounds, distant rustles that he couldn't pinpoint. Something, someone, was out there. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. Ryan's heart skipped a beat as he rushed back to the camp, finding Sarah and a few other passengers gathered around a woman who had been sleeping near the trees. The woman was clutching her leg, blood seeping through her fingers. "What happened?" Ryan demanded. I don't know," the woman stammered, her eyes wide with terror. "I woke up, and it felt like something was pulling at my leg." Ryan's gaze fell to the blood pooling around her. It was clear the injury was deep. There was a sharp cut, almost like a bite. "Get her to the stream," Ryan barked, motioning for the others to help. "We need to clean the wound before it gets infected." But as the woman was carried away, Ryan's mind raced. This wasn't an ordinary injury. The bite was too clean, too precise. He knew that this jungle was dangerous, but something felt off, almost like something was hunting them. And it was deliberate. Days passed in a blur of exhaustion. They managed to catch small game and forage for fruit, but the supplies were dwindling fast. Ryan had begun to notice strange things. A branch or vine that shouldn't have been there. A trail of fresh footprints that didn't belong to any of them. And there were whispers, voices on the wind, just faint enough to make him doubt his sanity. Tensions were rising. The group had begun to fracture. Some were terrified and wanted to leave. Others were convinced they were being followed by something unnatural. But Ryan knew better. The jungle was alive, in a way that went beyond the natural world. Someone, was manipulating their every step. One night, as Ryan sat by the fire, watching the flickering flames, a voice came to him in the dark. "You'll never escape," the voice whispered, cold and cruel. Ryan's heart froze. He whipped around, but saw no one. The voice continued to taunt him, a whisper on the wind, too close to be ignored. "We control this jungle," it hissed. "You are just another piece in the game." The next morning, Ryan made a decision. The jungle wasn't just dangerous, it was a trap. It was designed to ensnare, to break them down, to turn them against each other. It was all connected, a force that was far beyond any natural explanation. And Ryan was determined to uncover its secrets. He began searching, digging through old, overgrown ruins that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. They were remnants of a long-forgotten civilization, the stone structures half swallowed by the jungle's hunger. As he dug deeper into the ruins, Ryan uncovered something. An altar, ancient and worn, with strange symbols etched into its surface. The symbols spoke of an ancient power, one that had enslaved the jungle itself. The spirits of the old civilization had struck a bargain with something darker, binding the land to a malevolent force that would never let go. It wasn't just a trap, it was a curse. With this knowledge, Ryan knew what he had to do. He would confront the force that controlled the jungle. Only by breaking its hold could they hope to escape. The group gathered one final time, Ryan standing before them. He knew the path ahead would be treacherous, but this was their only chance. The jungle was not just a force of nature, it was alive, and only by confronting its dark power could they escape. "We can't leave until we destroy what controls this jungle," Ryan said. "We need to break the curse, and that means facing what's behind it. But we have to do it together." The survivors, battered and broken, nodded. They had no choice. They would either face the jungle's wrath or face death. Together, they ventured into the heart of the jungle, toward the ruins. The air was thick, the jungle closing in around them, but Ryan had one final weapon, his resolve. With each step, they grew closer to breaking the curse. And when they reached the heart of the jungle, Ryan made the final sacrifice, breaking the ancient altar and severing the jungle's hold over them. The jungle screamed in fury, but Ryan didn't look back. They had won.